Okay. So this is kind of a short lecture, but we're going to talk. There'll be two short ones actually. We're going to talk about note taking, and as you can see, like our first discussion post, and you'll get a couple that are kind of like that, where I have you summarize an article because I want you to learn to take notes, kind of like I showed you with the video, where you watch the video and you're picking out factual information that you think is going to be relevant for your report. So taking notes is actually really important, and there's a little bit of an art to it, especially if you don't have good handwriting. So if you're like me, I used to write in pretty good block lettering, but when I first started as an officer, my penmanship was atrocious. So I would have to print everything. So whatever you do, just understand that it's important that you can read your own writing, because that way you won't mess up numbers or people's last names or spellings and things like that. And of course, if you don't know, don't assume, because like for my first name, it's William Anthony. I go by Tony. Tony, you can spell a couple of different ways. So don't just assume that it's Tony or Tony. You may want to ask, especially because you just don't know. So, little introduction. What we're going to do is we're going to take a look at how to recall some of your actions out in the street when you're dealing with a case, which is kind of like note taking. We'll talk a little bit about the guidelines of note taking and how to do an outline, which I had an example in that video in chapter 2. I kind of did a little quick one sentence, facts, which is kind of a really easy outline to follow. And you can even make headings in your notebook if you want. Sometimes that helps people. And then we'll understand, hopefully by the time we're done, we'll start to understand the overall importance of creating a kind of a format and a style that you take notes in. Does anybody out there, can you guys, anybody write in shorthand? Okay. And I was going to say that it's great if you're really good at it, but oh, a long time ago. Okay. Yeah, the only problem sometimes with writing in shorthand is that if somebody else was had your notes or your partner and they were looking for something and trying to interpret it, they may not be able to. So little small sentences and phrases and things that you can remember isn't a bad idea when it comes to notes. So, think of note taking as kind of a little bit of shorthand, but it's really meant to prompt your memory of what took place, as well as, what was observed and what was said. And, again, if you're going to use quotes in a report, if you're taking notes, make sure that you quote it in your notes, so that way that it's something that you're going to want to actually quote. Remember that your mind works faster than your ability to write things down. So, and you kind of think about that. If you're trying to take notes on someone that speaks very, very quickly, and you're trying to do that, it might be hard to write every single thing down. You can't get all the words. And you may not have the luxury to type what somebody is saying. So you're going to have to either slow the person down just a little bit, ask for clarification, or be able to kind of use a little bit of your own shorthand using like key phrases or words that are going to kind of help you. I typically used to do it in sentence format, kind of like what you saw in the video and in your next or this week's actually written assignment. Note taking, if you're going to be at a crime scene and you're going to take notes or anything like that, or do any type of evidence collection or anything, make sure that you don't do anything until your crime scene is rendered safe, meaning that you're very sure that there's no suspects in the area, um, or there's the possibility that the sprinklers are going to come on in 5 minutes and shoot water all over your crime scene. So that's part of making your scene safe. So before you do any type of writing, make sure that you've got control of your crime scene, and then always be, very conscious of, kind of your surroundings. In case, because a lot of times people at crime scenes, they stand there and they watch. So just pay attention to those individuals. But again, don't do anything until your crime scene is safe. So your first basic step for note taking is basically, kind of finding the right kind of notebook. And there's, you're probably wondering, well, God, why does this textbook, or why is this professor telling me about finding the right kind of notebook? Well, the reason is, uh, cops will take notes on anything, like a napkin, which I'm sure you can probably figure out that's not the best thing to write down somebody's statement on. Or single pieces of paper that can get lost or thrown away, or you spill coffee on them or something like that. So having a notebook that's convenient is good, and understanding the different types of notebooks is kind of important. Most officers will carry a pocket notebook. Okay, it's kind of a 3x5 card, if you will, about that size, and it'll fit in either in your back pocket. It'll actually fit in your front pocket, but more comfortably in your back pocket or your top shirt pocket. And then you can just reach down and pull it out. It's super, it's easily accessible. It works great for jotting down short, the pages aren't very big. So you have to kind of be aware of that you're not going to have huge areas to write on. So if you have a lot to write, you may use quite a few pages. So you just have to kind of think about that. So it's not really good for some long drawn out interview where you're going to sit and talk to somebody for 2 hours in a little 3x5 notebook, because you're going to use every single page. So that's kind of the pocket notebook. Next would be a steno pad. It's a little bit larger. It's about 6x9, give or take. This one works a little bit better for interviewing witnesses or suspects at a crime scene when there's no sense of urgency, of course. It's more of a bound notebook, and the pages are not meant to be removed, so you have to be careful of that too. So it's got the little spiral type kind of at the top, if that makes any sense. You guys, and I think I have some pictures of them later as we go through this. A lot of times there's pre-printed note sheets. So you'll see these, kind of like the ones you're typing into for your crime report. A lot of these agencies have these pre-printed forms where all you have to do is fill them in, or you can fill them in on the computer, either one. Like DUI arrests, under the influence of drugs, field interview cards, gang cards. These are all pre-printed. So you don't have to take notes on a blank piece of paper. You just fill in the boxes as you go along, which makes it actually a lot easier for anybody to use. So like here's a DUI, driving under the influence forms for the Riverside County Sheriff's Department. They're all fill in the box. You could do it by hand, or they're in the computer, kind of like the fillable forms that I made for our class. So you can type in the information. So it makes it quite a bit easier to use, and you don't have to take notes again in a notebook, because you can just write the information right down on these forms on a clipboard or on a laptop or a computer or something like that. A legal pad, these are the longer ones. So they're a little bit longer. I believe they're the same width as a standard like tab or kind of pad of paper, but they're a little bit longer. And these notepads, again, they're kind of the larger ones. Officers use them all the time because there's a lot of room to write. And these are good for interviewing in a controlled environment. So if you're at the station and you're interviewing a victim or a witness or even a suspect, you've got a lot of page space where you can write down information, along with that. But real quick, before I go any further, besides using notepads to write stuff down if you're interviewing a suspect, what else should you be doing?
Could you record it?
Yes, you should be recording. It's always important, and almost every interview room that I know now in modern law enforcement has the capability to record. And it's important that you do that, because then you can always go back and you can listen to the interview again to make sure you didn't misquote or misrepresent something. But it also can be used as evidence if the person changes their statement later on. So any type of suspect interview on a big case. If it's a little small case, you don't have to, but it's good to get into the habit to record your interviews. And if it's a really, if it's a homicide case, a sexual assault, those larger cases, video is even better. So a lot of these interview rooms have, they have built-in video capabilities and audio, because then you can see the person's body language. And then they can't say that you threatened them or you coerced them or anything else. So video and audio is a fantastic thing to remember to do. Loose leaf notebooks, most officers typically don't like to use these, but they are preferred for major cases where you're going to be inserting a lot of things. So even in the day, in this day and age of paperless reporting and things like that, we have what we call homicide books. And so you have a big binder and you start, you punch holes in a lot of the different forms and things, and you start to fill up that binder because you need the room for everything that you're going to start putting in there. So a lot of times we keep these hard copy homicide books, and you'll make a copy for the district attorney's office, and you'll keep one on file in your organization. Same with closed or cold case files. If you've ever watched cold case files, a lot of times you'll see that they're big fat binders that have all of the different reports inside them. So, they're not great for just little interviews, but they're good for major cases. Because they're big and bulky, they're not good for walking around a crime scene. They're too cumbersome. But they're good for those larger, bulky items that you're going to be booking with all those different reports and things. So really, note taking, kind of going back a step here, it helps document your actions and observations when responding to a call for service. Whatever your career is, probation, parole, corrections, doesn't really matter. It still helps document everything. And again, when you're talking about notes, you're recording names, locations, and key events of the incident, at a time when these events are really fresh in your mind. Don't think, well, let me ask you, has anybody, and maybe if you're a server, you can do this, but has anybody been to a restaurant where, say you've got 4 or 5 people at your table, let's just go with 4, and the server comes up and they start taking your order and they write nothing down? Yeah, and it freaks me out. It's like, she didn't write anything down. He didn't write anything down. He took 4 full orders and then walked away. And sometimes they get it right, and sometimes they don't get it right. So for you want to make sure that you get it right. So don't just think that you can memorize things. And again, clarify spellings of streets, people's names, first name and last name, so that way you don't mess it up because their name could be different. Phone numbers, super important that you get clarification on a phone number, so that way you can contact somebody if you need to. Nothing's worse than a bad phone number or a bad address. So important things to kind of keep in mind. So some general guidelines for notes. Just like with a report, start at the beginning, collect all the information that you need for an accurate report. You can even do headings when you take notes if you want, if it helps you. Try to take your notes in chronological order, so that way you can just kind of flip through the pages and you're not having to search through a notebook through 20 pages of notes trying to figure out where your stuff is. So again, just accuracy and the format for note taking is super important. Always put your name on the outside or the inside cover of your notebook. And the reason is in case it gets lost, or a lot of times defense attorneys will try to subpoena your notes. And if your department policy is that you don't keep your notebooks, that's okay. You can shred them. But if your policy is, as in some organizations, that you save your notes for 6 months, then you'll save your notebooks, for 6 months or whatever your policy is. But I used to staple like one of my business cards on just, to the outside cover of my notebook. And that way it identifies whose notebook it is, etc., in case it's lost or, someone picks up the wrong notebook at the station or whatever. So, but you want to make sure that it's yours and it's readily identifiable. Another couple of helpful hints: write on only one side of the page, because this really does help with the kind of the ink seeping through. I've known some younger officers that would write with a Sharpie, and so it's kind of like a marker, and it just seeps through the pages. So when you flip the page and then they write on that page, and then you can't really tell what some of the letters are. So only one side of the page. Again, without overemphasizing it, make sure that your information, again, chronological order, it's accurate, and your spelling and your names and addresses and everything is on target. It'll totally help out. Plus, again, as I kind of made a note here, you could have your notebook subpoenaed to court. Some departments, again, have a policy that you shred them, and some don't. So it just kind of depends where you work and what the policy is. Some more kind of guidelines begin, when you list your events, when you start to kind of put down your information. Use your notepad for investigations only, especially if you have to keep it. Don't put your personal information in your notebook. Anybody want to give me a guess on why you shouldn't do that?
In case it gets lost.
Yeah, or lost. Yeah, lost or stolen, and you have all of your personal info in there, or, girlfriends' phone numbers, boyfriends' phone numbers. I mean, just all this stuff. Maybe your calendar, you write, you're one of those people that write down a lot of stuff. Do this today, do that today. You just don't want to have a bunch of personal information in there. So keep it to the investigative stuff. That way, none of your real personal information kind of gets out there. So you don't want that. Remember recording, using a recording device. And this is what we used to carry kind of a long time ago when tape recorders first came out. Well, actually, they were more actually little cassette tapes, and then they morphed into these little digital recorders. And we would use these in the field to record individual statements and things like that. So it's not a bad idea to record. Nowadays, they have body cameras. So again, not only do you have to be careful about, what you're writing and this and that, with body cameras, you have to be careful with what you say, how you act, what you do, your demeanor, everything else, because that's all subject to subpoena. So body cameras are a great tool, but you have to understand that they typically run, and they're going to catch you maybe saying something that you probably didn't want to say. So a lot of the new ones look like this. And they're small. They used to be really big, but now they're small. They've got audio. Some of them are coming out with facial recognition, but they're a great tool. And you can go to the station, you can upload the information from your body camera, and you can review that too, and put that part in your report if you want. A lot of times now the DA is asked, if it's an arrest report and there's some good evidence that's on your body camera, you send that video to the district attorney's office with your report, because they'll want to use it for prosecution purposes. So, these are all, interesting things, but keep in mind, make sure that your notes match what's on the camera. That's why it's good to kind of, make sure you review things. Don't just assume that you remember everything, because sometimes we don't. So recording devices, they're a great tool. They're, to record victim statements, witness statements, spontaneous suspect statements, those things that people just blurt out. And it might be really critical if you can get a good spontaneous statement on audio or even on video when you play that in front of the jury. It's better than words. Whatever you write in your report might sound okay. The suspect challenged me to fight and used profanity and did this and that. But if you can show the video, it's going to have a more significant impact when it goes to court. So that'll help kind of bolster your report. Some things that aren't good, sometimes they malfunction. A lot of times there's background noise. If you work in a city, when I worked in Rialto, that Fontana-Rialto corridor off the 10 freeway, if you know what I'm talking about, it's super windy. And sometimes if you're up in the north end and you have the camera on, the wind, you can just hear the wind, and you almost can't hear what you're saying over the camera. Sometimes they get damaged, and then unfortunately, sometimes people delete stuff, which is a policy violation. So you never want to delete something without prior approval, etc. But again, that depends on your organization, you know, who you work for, on what the policy is for deleting video or audio. Don't forget about dispatch when it comes to note taking, because a lot of times, you know, they can give you good information. They'll actually print the call. If you go on a call and you run somebody's name and they have a warrant and all that stuff, they'll print you out like a teletype printout, and you can use that to, like, as notes for your report on who the reporting party was and where the call was at and what the times were exactly, things like that. So again, using dispatch is really, really important. So I'm going to take like a couple of seconds really quick, since it looks like we're doing okay on time, and talk to you a little bit about this. You know, when it talked about dispatch, you know, and here talking about officer safety when you take notes and things like that, it's important that you pay attention. We talked about your surroundings. This is a really horrible video. It doesn't show the whole thing, which is good, and I'm hoping I can get it to play on here. Let's see if it'll pop up for me. All right, so this is a video that basically, where an Arizona police officer is just going out to interview somebody for a vandalism report. And that's really it. And some threats that he had made to his girlfriend.
Strawberry. What's that?
The video gets a little bit clearer in just a second. It's a little fuzzy right now.
We talk outside? We just talked on the phone. We did. How you doing? Good. You talk outside?
That's the body camera, so you know it's on. It'll make that chirp noise every once in a while.
Alright, I'll follow you. Alright. You don't have any weapons in your pockets or anything like that? Okay.
My tooth does not let me eat in days.
Okay. How bad is the pain?
On a scale of 1 to 10, like a 12.
Like a 12?
It shoots up to here, here, here.
Okay. Okay. So, I was in the area. Got some other calls coming in, but I thought I'd swing by.
Yeah.
The other stuff in the apartment, she's showing me like a little bookshelf. The polish, you didn't state how the polish got that way. She said the pumpkin got knocked over, or the handle got ripped off, or whatever, the stem.
Oh, the pumpkin. No, honestly, I think the pumpkin was just a casualty. The curtain selling.
Okay.
Can you guys hear the wind on the video? Could you hear the wind blowing in there? Yeah, so I mean, so again, that's the body cam, and sometimes, I mean, it usually works well, but you get those high winds, you'll hear that wind blowing.
Well, the curtain's in the bedroom and the pumpkin's in the kitchen, so how'd that happen?
The pumpkin, the dog grabbed the pumpkin, so the reason we always keep the pumpkin out of the dog, she always wants to play, keep and eat the pumpkin. We've had it for a long time, and
I'm going to speed up just a little.
Okay. Did the dog knock anything over or break anything that you know?
Not that I know of, and then all my stuff I threw into bags, and then I went down, there's 2 sets of stairs in the apartment. I went down one, and Hannah was parked on the other side. And
Okay.
I was looking for her, and then in the meantime, I mean, I could hear Bessie, the dog's name is Bessie Kenny, barking like crazy, you know?
Okay.
Because she's not supposed to bark because the apartment complex is like a quiet complex, you know?
Yeah.
And, yeah. But the whole curtain thing just...
You're talking about the blinds in her bedroom?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, those are from my old apartment, and not that it matters, but I put them in the drywall. I didn't have a drywall sink. I put screws in. It was crooked. It was too low, and it turned into a fiasco. And that's kind of the wedge, in the
Okay.
in this fight.
You mind if I just pat down your pockets real quick? You don't have anything in here?
No.
Okay. Nothing in here?
No, this is my smoke.
Okay.
Okay. So it's not that hard to figure this out. Okay, they don't show the whole thing, which is actually good, but I'm sure you can all see this right here, right? Okay, and that the officer was just basically taking notes, but he didn't really, he didn't, unfortunately, he didn't pat the guy down first before he started taking notes. He really was, the only thing he was able to do was kind of react by sticking his hand up. And unfortunately, he was killed. So when we talk a little bit about, making sure that your crime scene is secure, there's a reason kind of like why we tell you that is to make sure that, you have your scene is secure, your people is secure, and it doesn't mean be too paranoid. It just means that you really have to pay attention because things happen super, super quick, like in this particular instance. So I wanted to make sure that you kind of knew the importance of, you know, checking people out and doing what you need to do before you get into your investigative thing a little bit more. Okay, so a couple other issues just to talk about note taking, and then we'll move to the other lecture pretty quick. There's a lot of agencies, again, they have computer-aided dispatch. And again, this records all of that, all the information that the reporting party calls when they tell the dispatcher, hey, I hear shots fired, etc. It also timestamps all those critical timestamps. So your arrival time to a scene, the dispatcher will timestamp it, or the computer does. Any suspect information, any vehicle information, anything that you say on the radio, I'm in foot pursuit, chasing a suspect southbound on E Street, passing 12th. The dispatcher puts that in the call and it'll print out. It's actually going to be in there. So when you get in car pursuits or foot pursuits, you don't have to remember every single place that you ran to, because as long as you're talking on the radio, it's going to be documented by the dispatcher. So, dispatch is really helpful. So don't forget that they're a great source for you for notes, because they can, kind of come up with all this information for you. A little bit kind of other housekeeping things, abbreviations, be careful. They can be useful, but again, if you don't know what it means after you abbreviate it, then you're going to be trying to figure out, what does that mean? I'm not sure what I said. So, you may have to come up with your own style, something that you can remember, if you're going to use, abbreviations. So, keep that in mind. Again, we talked about this in your textbook on 24 through 26. I listed the phonetic alphabet, but these are abbreviations that I'm talking about. So like AKA, if you remember what that means, which is great. So that's also known as, so that'd be like an alias name. DOA, DOB, somebody's birthday. APB, all points bulletin. FTA, failure to appear. GOA, gone upon arrival. You can use those for your notes. You're not going to put those in your report because other folks won't understand it, but for your notes, you can put them in. Just remember that you be clear when you write. So that way, you know what it is that you put in there. So the important thing of this whole last couple of minutes, taking notes is you have to do it quickly sometimes, or you can slow the person down if they're talking too fast. So that way you can catch up, or you can ask them to repeat it if you need to. There's nothing wrong with that. Do you mind saying that again? I didn't quite get the whole thing. So be legible. Sloppy, illegible written notes. Going to make it hard to read, and they're really going to be useless when you get all the way back to the station and you look at your notes and you're like, I don't remember what this is. I can't tell what it is. And it happens a lot. Make a mark in your notes when you start a new topic. A lot of times I used to just draw a line So I'm kind of, if I do a witness statement, and I'm done with it, I would draw a line under it. So that way I know I'm done with that statement and I'm going to move on to something else. Or you can just write witness Jones statement and then you write it underneath. But you may want to just kind of separate it, especially if you have subcategories. So, nothing wrong with using little headings or drawing lines in your notebook, etc. And here's another hint: don't draw pictures. I don't know how many doodlers there are out there, but if you're like me, I used to be, when I grew up, I used to write on all of my book covers and draw little pictures and doodle and, stuff like that. Don't do that on your notebook pages. So just be careful of what you write inside there. The key to an effective writing technique, again, is to find that balance between accurate, reliable notes and making sure that you're safe. If you don't think you're safe before you take your notes, if you have to have someone sit down on the curb or pat them down because they're a little squirrely or something like that, and they seem like they're very, very, super nervous, there's nothing wrong with doing that, and then safely go ahead and start taking your notes. But just make sure that you're aware of your surroundings and things like that. Leave a little bit of room on the pages in your notes in case you forget something. So don't write all the way down to the very end of the bottom of the page. I mean, you could always flip it over, but if you're going to start a new subject or a new interview, leave just a little gap in case you forget something. So that way you can kind of put something back in there if you need to. And then again, we talked about, documenting keywords and phrases expressed by a victim. And that means exactly what they say. If they tell you, F off, I'm going to kill you, then don't put in your report, the subject used profanity and threatened me. You're going to say exactly what they said, even though it might seem embarrassing or whatever. And maybe you don't use profanity, which is great. But if that's what they said, that's what you need to write, because that's a really important piece of evidence. Does that kind of make sense to everybody? Just those big things like that. You want to make sure that you... pencils, you can use a pen or a pencil. It really doesn't matter. Either one. A lot of people use mechanical pencils. A lot of them use the super fancy pens. A lot of officers have the ones that you can write upside down. It's like a gravity pen, so the ink doesn't, it can write in different air, how you're holding the pen. But again, you can kind of pick whatever you like. If you're a lefty, anybody left-handed out there? So if you're a lefty, sometimes when you write on paper, have you ever noticed that you smear the pencil or the ink on a like a sheet of paper because your hand sits on the paper? So if you're right-handed, you're going to kind of go across and the letters are here. But if you're a lefty like me, you're going to start on the left-hand side of the page and you're going to write over the top of what you wrote. So be aware of that too. So sometimes lefties are a little bit, we're a little disadvantaged with that. We kind of talked about this already. Break down your information in your notes to, again, logical categories. Be clear, be precise, make sure you can read it. Again, leave personal info out. Number the pages in your notebook. Why would we do that? Why would you want to put a number on each page in your notebook?
To make sure that you have the right pages of notes, because sometimes they would tend to say you took out one page, just to make sure that no one would think that you took out an important page or something.
Yeah, numbering your pages is good, and that'll help too. If you're going through your notebook and you see that page 4 is gone, you may have to explain that. So it's always good to number them that way, and it kind of helps keep you chronological too. You're not skipping around through your notebook and just finding a blank page to write on. But find your own organizational method that really works for you. But, again, just know that notebook is a permanent record and it can be subpoenaed. I haven't had too many times where my notebook actually got subpoenaed, but it can. Okay, so it's about 7:50 and we finished with the first lecture. I can actually go right into the next one, or we can take a little bit of a break. What would you guys prefer?
go right there.
Okay. And if you need like a break on your own to, go get something to drink or whatever, you can go ahead and do that. Actually, what I do need to do though is